this PowerPoint. So let me preface this by explaining that this is really um, a simple utility that I use to get familiar with familiar enough with CDS so that I could be able to figure out how to do the real provisioning that we're going to need for the kinds of VNFs that we're going to be exploring. So I'm an independent consultant with Cable Labs, and Cable Labs is think of it as a pre-competitive and standardization R&D firm for cable companies around the world, including the dominant ones in the US. And as part of their convergence exploration, we're looking at a converged services management layer, which is based on ONAP. And my goal with the team there is to really use ONAP without touching it, to use it as it is. And so what I'm showing here comes out of Frankfurt. And an important part of that is to be able to adapt the resource assignment in such a way that I don't have to go in and make any code changes to Orchestrator, SDNC, anything. So CDS worked out really well for this purpose. It wasn't easy to use, and I'm not the first person who's elaborated that. And based on the way in which I've used it and the way in which I expect it to be used within Cable Labs, I'm going to look at packaging things in such a way that the view is simpler. For a lot of the things that we need to do, there's going to be a certain number of routine functions that need to be carried out. And we're interacting with multiple VIMs. So we have ONAP up and running in Azure, but we are also going to have Kubernetes clusters running in Azure, AWS, on private facilities using OpenShift, and so on. So we have quite a variety of different destinations for things, and it's been very easy to add all those clusters into ONAP. I've scripted all that work to make it easy for myself. And so this was really the last piece. How do we reach out and talk to all these different VIMs? How do we also talk to other SDN controllers in such a way that it's going to be meaningful? And the key to that was to be able to use scripting. And so there was one really great scripting example that was on the workflow side of it, but a lot of the scripting I need to do is going to be on the resource side. And thanks to Josef, I got the keys to the car for that one and managed to make quite short work out of using Kotlin to do most of this work. So this is a simple educational example, and for anyone who's new, it will help them really get into understanding roughly how it works, not the totality of the way in which CDS is powerful, but really enough to be able to pull together basic things. So the underlying assumption is everything is being deployed to Kubernetes. In this case, the VNF is going to be WordPress. So it's an easy thing for anyone to get their hands on to be able to try this experiment. I converted each of the WordPress VNFs, the two of them, basically into Helm charts so that I would be able to deploy them using Helm through the plugin, and then be able to have override values. I'm not building any override templates or things like that. I'm just generating the override values and passing them in. It works fine for me, and it's simpler than generating new profiles. So I'm trying to do the least number of things to be able to make the system work effectively. So I'll start with the core notion here. With the WordPress, what I call the WordPress VNF, there's two VF modules. If that's the modeling we're going to use, the WordPress web app and the MySQL database. Part of this dialogue, by the way, in here is for me to explain it to the Cable Labs folks that are not really steeped in a lot of this. And what CDS really allows me to do is two things. So the enclosing VNF represents a way to do sort of that high-level modeling across all the VF modules, get assignments that need to be shared, and then each VF module can obviously have their own specific assignments. And then those assignments become Helm values that are overridden in the deployment of the VF module. So I'm going to pick just on DB host, which is the public IP address that's going to be created by Azure in this case for use for the MySQL load balancer, and for WordPress, obviously, to access MySQL. Now, again, I've taken a simple example and made it arbitrarily more complicated because you would never do this normally unless you're going to put them in two different regions. But that's okay for the purpose here because it explains how I can go out, solve the access to Azure, all the credentialing that needs to be done there, do things on the VM, get results back, and integrate it as part of the flow for CDS. So here was the database definition, and thanks as well to Yuri for an enormous amount of help here in trying to navigate my way through understanding things. So the data definition for DB host basically has two sources that are relevant. The capability that allows me to use Kotlin in order to get the IP address and from Azure and create it if it's not created. And then that's going to be done at the VNF level. And then down at the VF module level, it's going to later on retrieve using the SDNC interface, basically the REST interface, to get that value that's been squirreled away. So those are the two key things. So the mapping for the VNF is going to include the reference for in DB host says go use the capability, the Kotlin capability, and these are a collection of things that are going to be needed in order to carry that out. Subscriber, tenant, app ID, and credentials are all things to be able to talk to Azure to get credentialed and get the token back. The resource group is going to be specific to this this region that I'm deploying in, or think of it as the zone, in order to be able to say I'm going to create the IP address in a particular zone, and then it'll live there. The mapping for, and I'm just going to pick one of the VF modules, the MySQL, the mapping for that one is going to say, go and use the SDNC dictionary source. In that case, I pass in the service instance ID and the VNF ID, which are needed to do the REST lookup. So finally, the last piece of this before I get to the Kotlin is the Helm overrides. So in this case, maybe I should put this in full screen, make it a little easier for you guys to see. Can you guys all see the full screen now? I hope so. And not
yes, we can.
Sometimes I wind up with the opposite display that I'm seeing on my Mac. So in this case, so DB host and the values.yaml file would be like the default value if you have both of these modules. In the same cluster would be WordPress MySQL. And then you can see that there's a spec for a load balancer, and that's the value that is going to be replaced. So when I go through all this generation, it'll generate DB host, and that'll be passed in through the multi-cloud Kubernetes plugin. So here's the Kotlin. So this once I understood the magic in order to be able to get into this, the rest was easy. It was just programming. And not that that's always easy, but it was relatively easy in terms of trying to navigate my way through CDS. So I collect, this is actually older code, so I've changed some things that I had just hardwired in at the moment while I was trying stuff out. But I grab all the credentials, there are two, and then I create, and I used a model that I had seen in the workflow orchestration example, which I thought was nice. So I just create the management URL object, and that object is used for any kinds of requests going to Azure. Because once I have the token is cached, it's good for a while, and then I'll do all the different operations. I don't show you all the details in this because it would take too long. So the first thing I do is I go and I check if the public IP address exists, and if it does, then I'm done, because they use labels, and if the address already exists, then I don't have to create it. Otherwise, I go into Azure and I create it. I provide the resource group, which, like I said, this has changed a bit. The zone is actually computer from the resource group now. I don't need to pass it in. And it may not return right away because sometimes it takes time. So I put a retry loop in there for, up to 2 minutes. It really shouldn't take very long. It's not like instantiating something big like a VM or something like that. It's quite fast. And I'll just go in a loop to keep polling for the IP address. And when it returns, I do the assignment. And at this point, the VNF portion of the show is done. when I go to, and then the SDN lookup I'm not demonstrating. So what I do is I show the logs here. And you can see as I go in, and I edited these logs just to simplify them a little bit, but you can see the request to do the get, where I'm actually, this is the get that actually goes to retrieve the public IP address. This is the token post to retrieve the token. And then the address wasn't found, so then I'm going to do a put in order to be able to retrieve the IP, to get an IP address created. It comes back created. But the status was pending. So there's a status you can check, and I go through all those exercises. And by the end of it, I'm setting the resource value to the IP address that was found. During the MySQL resolve, this is the actual query that goes out to SDNC. So this is just through the GR API to look up for that particular value. With those instance variables, with those variables being used as keys, and it returns the same value, and I set DB host to that value, and I'm done. So it spins up, then after this, it goes through and it spins up, and those two objects have that host, and it worked exactly as I would want. All right, that's it for the deck. So I did want to say how much, you know, in spite of the complexity in CDS, and I know that I've only tapped into a small, that you know, I always observed as a manager of development at AT&T when it comes to changing things in ONAP, because I really, you know, we were constantly having to tinker with the software to add in our own value. And this really allows us to step away from that and very conveniently, you know, package up, upload the CBA, and you are in business. And even the development model, so long as you're not changing things around it, just the continuous updates of CBA and retrying things makes the development cycle relatively painless. In this particular case, I didn't do any of the work locally. I did it all with the instance of the core that we have deployed in Azure. And I didn't notice any, you know, pain or suffering once I was going through it. Just a forward-looking aspect. So one of the things that I'm developing as part of the work to be able to take advantage of both the CDS model and really the ONAP model for larger scale deployments of VNFs across this, you know, architecture that we have this multi-zone architecture that supports cable companies of a mix of private and in theory, you know, public. So it's a fully hybrid model for different classes of VNFs. The first one we're going to try is actually one that was developed by Cable Labs. I'm not going to explain it at this point, but you know, it involves deploying things in multiple zones, things as close as the hub, which is the data site that is closest to the customer, all the way back up to what you would consider a national data center, kind of like an NTC if you're building a mobile network. And so I have a lot of scripting that I've been developing that will take really a JSON file that describes all the different instantiations you want. Think of the examples, the one that was the kind of canonical one with the virtual firewall CNF. Think of taking that and generalizing it so that you can, in fact, do this in a large scale and say, suppose I have 100 deployments that I need to do. So I'm going to use the macro flow basically 100 times, because every time I use the macro flow, I can be, in fact, deploying lots of pods as an artifact of that. I may not always choose to do it that way, but I can if I want, where it's meaningful. And just by basically describing in a JSON, think of it as a JSON record, how I would want it deployed, I've added a collection of bash utilities to basically completely manage that, to stand it up to a level of concurrency that I want, and then to be able to simply reconcile when the requests are done, and including dependencies that I can't deploy a particular site until another one is done, to ensure that if there's an ordering that's necessary, it can be done as well. So I'm building up all those tools, and I'm hoping that Cable Labs will allow me to open source those to the community, because I think they're they're going to be handy. That's it.
Gerald,
Yeah.
quick question.
Yep.
Is this blueprint available somewhere?
I haven't made it available. I got to check with Cable Labs to see what the rules are.
Okay.
But you know, I should be. I'm hoping that they will be, you know, open to the idea, since we're working from the community, to allow me to, because it doesn't have any of their VNF stuff in there. So
Right.
it shouldn't be an obstacle, but I've got to get their approval first.
Sure.
But, you know, as tutorials go, this one is a lot simpler than VFW.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think as a community, if we come up with really simple tutorials that really poke at the things that people need to do, working with the scripting, working with the data dictionaries and the alternative models, I think that allows you to separate yourself from complex applications that you're also trying to wrap your head around at the same time as trying to learn the tooling. So I admit I have not learned all the tooling that's coming in place. Part of that is because I know it's all still in flux, and I think I'm kind of waiting for the day that it stabilizes. But, you know, there are a few things you really need to understand, and once you understand those, you can work fairly quickly and safely. And again, I really want to put a shout out to both Yuri and Yosef for saving my ass on this one. It was really, they were huge helps in walking me through this, and the tool is really powerful. I really do love it. I don't love the complexity in it, but I love the power. And I recognize that that's a trade-off.
Gerald, someone would say you would use, if you don't use, what is it, Paint to manage, like, you know, changes to your pictures, right? You would use a more powerful tool to do that in Adobe or something like that. Yeah, so this is a very good demo. Thank you for sharing this with us. Any other questions for Gerald?